The unexpected arrival. The massive orbital station called Harmony 7 rotated slowly above the swirling storms of Tempest Prime, its silver hull reflecting the lightning that danced through the gas giant's atmosphere below. The station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 17 different species, working together to create the most advanced diplomatic facility in known space. Its rotating rings provided gravity for species that needed it, while its central core offered zero-G environments for those who preferred to float. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, watching the hypnotic patterns of the storm clouds beneath them. Her military uniform had been replaced with the simple blue robes of a diplomatic envoy, but her posture still carried the confidence of someone who had commanded starships in the outer colonies. At 45, she had seen more of the galaxy than most humans, and today she would represent her entire species in negotiations that could determine humanity's place among the stars. Behind her, Dr. James Morrison sat quietly in a corner chair, reading from a tablet with the patient concentration of someone who had spent decades studying. He was perhaps 70 years old, with white hair that stuck up at odd angles and wire-rimmed glasses that made his blue eyes look larger than they were. He wore a simple gray suit that had seen better days, and he carried himself with the gentle manner of someone who spent most of his time in libraries rather than spaceships. Most people who met Dr. Morrison assumed he was a retired professor or perhaps a government researcher. They were not entirely wrong, but they were not entirely right either. Sarah had worked with Dr. Morrison for 3 years, ever since he had been assigned as her scientific advisor. He was brilliant, certainly, with an understanding of physics and engineering that bordered on the miraculous. But there was something else about him, something that made veteran soldiers step aside when he walked past, something that made trained diplomats choose their words more carefully when he was listening. Sarah had never been able to put her finger on exactly what it was, but she trusted Dr. Morrison more than anyone else in the galaxy. The door to the observation deck whispered open, and Sarah turned to see their escort approaching. Harmony 7 used a species called the mediators to facilitate communication between different delegations. They were tall, slender beings with silver skin and 4 arms, and they had evolved specifically for diplomatic functions. Their voices could modulate to match the hearing range of any known species, and their facial expressions were carefully neutral to avoid giving offense. "Captain Chen," the mediator said in perfect English, "the council chamber is ready for your arrival. The other delegations have been waiting for approximately 12 minutes, which is within acceptable parameters for diplomatic punctuality." Sarah nodded and straightened her robes. Dr. Morrison closed his tablet and stood, moving with the careful precision of someone whose joints weren't as young as they used to be. Together, they followed the mediator through corridors that hummed with the voices of dozens of different species. The council chamber was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond through transparent aluminum panels. The chamber was arranged in concentric circles, with each delegation occupying a section designed for their specific needs. The aquatic depth swimmers had pools of water maintained at their preferred temperature. The crystalline resonance had platforms that vibrated at frequencies that helped them think more clearly. The insectoid hive collective had constructed geometric patterns that pleased their compound eyes. Sarah and Dr. Morrison took their places in the section reserved for newer member species. Around them, representatives from 43 different worlds watched with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Sarah had studied the files on each delegation, but seeing them in person was still overwhelming. The galaxy contained forms of life that human imagination could barely grasp. Directly across from them sat the delegation from the Draconic Alliance, a confederation of reptilian species that controlled 12 star systems in the galactic core. Their leader, Commander Zixith, was nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that shifted from deep green to black depending on his mood. His eyes were golden and never seemed to blink, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been refused. To their left, the Hive Collective had arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations. Ambassador Quillen, their speaker, looked like a praying mantis crossed with a mathematician's fever dream. Her 4 arms moved independently as she took notes, and her multifaceted eyes could track multiple conversations at once. Near the center of the chamber, the ancient conquered maintained their traditional position of honor. High Magistrate Vorth appeared as a column of shifting purple light, an energy being so old that his species had transcended physical form before humans had discovered fire. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. The session began with the ritual declarations of peace and mutual respect that were required by galactic law. Sarah listened politely as each delegation presented their formal greetings, but she could feel the tension building in the chamber. This was not a routine diplomatic meeting. The other species had called this gathering specifically to address what they called the human problem. Commander Zixith was the first to speak directly about humanity. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying the slight hiss that marked all members of his species. "We gather today to discuss a threat to galactic stability. The species known as humans has expanded rapidly since joining our community, claiming 17 new worlds in the past 5 years alone." Sarah kept her expression neutral. 17 worlds was accurate, but they were all previously uninhabited systems that humanity had terraformed with great effort and expense. There had been no conflicts with other species, no violations of established territorial agreements. Furthermore, Zixith continued, human military vessels have been detected in sectors far from their claimed territory. Their ships carry weapons that exceed normal defensive requirements. We have reason to believe that humanity is preparing for aggressive expansion at the expense of established civilizations. This was a more serious accusation, and Sarah felt her diplomatic training taking over. The human vessels Zixith was referring to were exploration ships carrying standard defensive armaments. They had been investigating distress signals from cargo vessels that had disappeared in the outer spiral arms. But presented this way, their activities sounded threatening. Ambassador Quillen's translator device buzzed as she spoke in the rapid clicking language of the Hive Collective. The human expansion pattern shows concerning similarities to historical aggressive species, the device announced in flat mechanical tones. Their population growth rate and resource consumption suggest territorial ambitions that could destabilize established trade routes. More delegates began voicing their concerns. The resonants complained about human mining operations that interfered with their meditation frequencies. The depth swimmers worried about human terraforming projects, changing the chemistry of nearby oceans. Each complaint, taken alone, might have been reasonable, but together they painted a picture of humanity as a disruptive and dangerous presence in the galaxy. Sarah waited for a pause in the accusations before standing to address the chamber. "Honored delegates," she began, "I appreciate your concerns, and I want to address them directly. Humanity has indeed expanded rapidly, but we have done so carefully and legally, following all established protocols for claiming uninhabited systems." She activated a holographic display showing human territory. "Our ships have been investigating pirate activity in the outer sectors because we received distress calls from vessels belonging to 12 different species. We have rescued over 3,000 beings in the past year alone." This was true, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Human rescue operations had become legendary among Sun, independent traders, and small colonies. When something went wrong in deep space, human ships were often the first to respond. "As for our military capabilities," Sarah continued, "we maintain defensive forces appropriate to our territorial responsibilities. We have never initiated aggression against any council member, and we have no intention of doing so." High Magistrate Vorth's column of light pulsed as he spoke. "The concerns raised are understandable." His voice echoed strangely, as if coming from everywhere at once. "Humanity is indeed powerful and growing stronger rapidly. But power itself is not evil. The question is how that power will be used." Sarah felt a moment of hope, but Commander Zixith was ready with his response. "The question of intent cannot be left to trust alone," he declared. We propose that humanity accept immediate oversight of their military development. Council peacekeepers should be stationed in all human systems to monitor their activities and ensure compliance with galactic law. The chamber erupted in discussion. Several delegations immediately voiced support for the proposal, while others expressed concern about the precedent it would set. Sarah realized that this had been planned in advance. The accusations, the timing, even the specific wording of the proposal suggested careful coordination among multiple species. Dr. Morrison had remained silent throughout the proceedings, but now he leaned forward slightly in his chair. Sarah glanced at him and saw that he was no longer reading his tablet. Instead, he was watching the delegates with an expression of mild interest, as if he were observing an interesting but not particularly important scientific experiment. "I must respectfully decline that proposal," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Humanity values its sovereignty and the right to self-determination that is guaranteed to all council members. We are willing to discuss additional transparency measures, but we cannot accept foreign military occupation of our worlds." "Then you confirm our suspicions," Zixith replied with satisfaction. "A peaceful species would have nothing to hide from legitimate oversight." Sarah felt the trap closing around her. If she agreed to the monitoring, humanity would be admitting guilt and accepting permanent subjugation. If she refused, it would be seen as proof of hostile intentions. The other delegates were watching carefully, waiting to see which way the conversation would turn. The debate continued for another hour, with various species presenting additional evidence of human aggression. Most of it was circumstantial or deliberately misinterpreted, but it was effective. Sarah could see that the majority of delegates were becoming convinced that humanity needed to be contained. Finally, High Magistrate Vorth called for a formal vote. "The proposal before us is clear." His voice resonated through the chamber. "Humanity will accept comprehensive monitoring of their military activities, or they will be suspended from council membership pending a full investigation." Sarah looked around the chamber, counting votes in her head. The outcome was already decided. Too many species had been convinced that humanity was a threat, and fear was a powerful motivator in galactic politics. She was about to respond when an alarm began sounding throughout the station. The soft chime that indicated routine announcements was replaced by the harsh warning tone that meant immediate danger. The chamber's main display activated, showing the external sensor readings. Unknown ships were approaching Harmony 7 at high speed. The vessels were sleek and predatory, with hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sarah recognized the design from intelligence briefings. They belonged to the Shadow Fleet, a mysterious organization that had been attacking isolated colonies and research stations throughout the outer sectors. "All delegates remain calm," announced the station's AI system. "This is a routine security matter. Station defenses are activating." But Sarah could see that this was not routine. The Shadow Fleet had never attacked a major diplomatic facility before, and their timing was suspiciously perfect. As the station's defensive platforms began firing, she noticed that the attackers seemed to know exactly where the weak points in the station's shields were located. Dr. Morrison stood up slowly, his movement drawing Sarah's attention away from the battle outside. He walked to the chamber's central platform with the unhurried pace of someone taking an evening stroll through a peaceful garden. But as he moved, something in the chamber began to change. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The background hum of the station's systems became quieter. Several of the more psychically sensitive species began showing signs of distress, their translators buzzing with words like pressure and watching and vast. Dr. Morrison reached the center of the platform and turned to face the assembled delegates. He smiled pleasantly, the same grandfatherly expression he wore when explaining complex physics equations. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," he said in his gentle voice, "I believe this would be an appropriate time for me to introduce myself properly. The Guardian awakens." The Guardian awakens. The attack on Harmony 7 intensified as Dr. Morrison spoke, but his calm voice somehow carried over the sound of weapons fire and stressed hull plates. Sarah watched from her seat as the elderly scientist stood in the center of the chamber, seemingly unconcerned that the station was under assault by one of the most feared organizations in the galaxy. "My name is Dr. James Morrison," he continued, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with a gesture that Sarah had seen him make thousands of times before. "I am 73 years old, and I have been studying theoretical physics for most of my adult life. These facts are all accurate, but they are not complete." The chamber's emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in red warning illumination. Through the transparent ceiling, Sarah could see the bright flashes of energy weapons as the station's defenses fought against the Shadow Fleet, but the attacking ships were too fast and too numerous. Harmony 7's shields were failing faster than they should have been possible. Commander Zixith rose from his seat, his scales shifting to angry red patterns. "Human, this is not the time for your academic presentations. The station is under attack." Dr. Morrison nodded politely. "Yes, I noticed. The Shadow Fleet has brought 47 vessels, including 6 dreadnoughts equipped with quantum disruption weapons. They know the exact frequency signatures of Harmony 7's defensive systems, which suggests they received detailed intelligence from someone with high-level access to station security." Several delegates turned to stare at the old scientist. The specific technical details he had just recited were not available to civilian observers, and the speed with which he had analyzed the attacking force was remarkable. "How could you possibly know that?" Ambassador Quillen's translator buzzed with confusion. Dr. Morrison smiled again. "I know it because I have been listening to their communications, monitoring their weapon signatures, and calculating their tactical capabilities since the moment they dropped out of hyperspace. This level of awareness is part of what I actually am, rather than what I appear to be." Another massive impact shook the station, and Sarah could hear the groaning of metal somewhere in the superstructure. The Shadow Fleet was systematically destroying Harmony 7's defensive platforms, and it was only a matter of time before they breached the hull. High Magistrate Vorth's column of light pulsed with what might have been concern. "Dr. Morrison, if you have some expertise that could help defend this station, we would welcome your assistance." "Oh, I don't have expertise," Dr. Morrison replied, his voice still carrying that same gentle academic tone. "I am something else entirely." He removed his glasses and folded them carefully, placing them in the breast pocket of his suit jacket. When he looked up, his blue eyes had changed. They were still kind, still grandfatherly, but now they held depths that seemed to stretch beyond the visible spectrum. "I am what your species would call a guardian," he said simply. "I am one of 7 beings created by humanity's collective will to protect what we value most. I am the manifestation of our determination to defend those who cannot defend themselves." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. In all the time she had known Dr. Morrison, she had never suspected that he was anything other than a brilliant but ordinary human being. Now, as she watched him speak to the assembled delegates, she could sense something vast and patient stirring behind his elderly facade. "This is impossible," Commander Zixith hissed. "Humans do not possess the technology to create artificial beings with such capabilities." "You are correct," Dr. Morrison agreed. "We do not create guardians through technology. We create them through necessity, through the collective unconscious desire of our species to protect the innocent. I came into existence during the siege of New Geneva Colony, when human civilians were being slaughtered by raiders while their defenders fought desperately to save them. I am their determination made manifest." The station shuddered again, and Sarah could see that the outer hull was beginning to breach in several locations. The Shadow Fleet had almost completed their assault, and soon they would be boarding Harmony 7 directly. "Even if your claims are true," High Magistrate Vorth said, "one being cannot stand against an entire fleet." Dr. Morrison began walking toward the chamber's main exit, moving with the same unhurried pace he had maintained throughout the crisis. But now Sarah could see that each step seemed to cover more distance than it should have, as if space itself was bending slightly around him. "You are quite right," he said over his shoulder. One being could not stand against such a force. Fortunately, I am not alone. As he reached the exit, Dr. Morrison paused and turned back to face the chamber one final time. Captain Chen, I want you to know that serving as your advisor has been genuinely enjoyable. You are an excellent representative of your species, and I hope the delegates here will remember that when they consider humanity's character. Then he stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the corridor beyond. Sarah started to follow him, but the chamber's blast doors suddenly sealed shut, trapping all the delegates inside. What is happening? Ambassador Quillen's translator buzzed frantically. Where did the human go? Sarah moved to the chamber's observation windows, trying to see what was occurring elsewhere on the station. The corridor outside was empty, but she could see that the emergency lighting was beginning to flicker in patterns that didn't match normal power fluctuations. He's moving through the station, she said quietly. Dr. Morrison is moving toward the outer docking bays. Through the chamber's transparent ceiling, the delegates could see the Shadow Fleet positioning itself for the final assault. The largest of their dreadnoughts was approaching the station's primary docking port, preparing to disgorge boarding parties that would seize control of Harmony 7's critical systems. Then something impossible happened. The dreadnought stopped. Not slowed, not maneuvered, but stopped completely, as if it had struck an invisible wall in space. Its engines continued firing, but the massive warship remained motionless against the star field. Sensor malfunction, Commander Zixith declared, but his voice lacked conviction. A second dreadnought approached from the opposite side of the station, its weapons charging for a final devastating barrage. But as it came within firing range, it too stopped suddenly, held in place by forces that the station's sensors could not detect. One by one, the entire Shadow Fleet found itself trapped in space around Harmony 7, their ships held motionless by an invisible presence that seemed to permeate the entire area. Their weapons continued firing, but the energy beams bent away from the station as if space itself was redirecting them. Then the voice of Dr. Morrison echoed through the chamber's communication system, but it no longer sounded like an elderly academic. The voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal hearing, and it spoke with the authority of someone who had never been refused by the fundamental forces of reality. Shadow Fleet vessels, the voice said, you have committed acts of piracy against civilian populations throughout the outer sectors. You have killed innocents who posed no threat to you, stolen resources that belonged to peaceful communities, and spread terror among species that sought only to live in harmony. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as the trapped warships began to change. Their hull plates started glowing with a soft blue light that seemed to emanate from within the metal itself. The glow spread across each vessel like a living thing, transforming weapons of destruction into something else entirely. You came here expecting to find a diplomatic facility protected only by standard defensive systems, Dr. Morrison's voice continued. Instead, you have encountered one of humanity's guardians. I am the manifestation of our species' determination to protect the innocent, and that protection extends to all beings who seek peace among the stars. The Shadow Fleet's dreadnoughts were now completely encased in blue light, their predatory shapes transformed into something that resembled giant flowers blooming in space. But Sarah could see that the light was not merely decorative. It was somehow restructuring the ships at a molecular level. Your vessels are being converted, Dr. Morrison explained, his voice growing gentler as the transformation progressed. Their weapon systems are becoming medical facilities. Their armor plating is being restructured to provide enhanced life support for refugees. Your warships are becoming hospital ships, capable of providing aid to the very communities you once terrorized. Commander Zixith's scales had shifted to patterns that Sarah had never seen before, colors that seemed to indicate confusion and awe rather than anger or fear. This is beyond any known technology, he whispered. How is this possible? Hi. GH Magistrate Vorth's column of light was pulsing rapidly, cycling through frequencies that made the chamber's crystal decorations sing in harmony. I have existed for millions of years, the ancient being said, and I have never witnessed anything like this. The human is manipulating matter and energy at levels that approach the fundamental forces of creation itself. Sarah pressed her face to the observation window, watching as the last of the Shadow Fleet vessels completed its transformation. Where moments before there had been instruments of destruction, now there were 47 hospital ships equipped with the most advanced medical technology she had ever seen. The chamber's blast doors unsealed, and Dr. Morrison walked back into the room. He was once again wearing his wire-rimmed glasses, and his simple gray suit looked exactly as it had before. But now every delegate in the chamber could sense the vast presence that resided within his elderly human form. "The immediate crisis has been resolved," he announced, returning to his seat beside Sarah. "The former Shadow Fleet personnel are being relocated to rehabilitation facilities where they can learn more constructive ways to spend their time. Their ships have been converted to serve the medical needs of frontier communities." He settled into his chair and reopened his tablet, returning to his reading as if nothing unusual had happened. But the silence in the chamber stretched on for several long minutes as delegates struggled to process what they had witnessed. Finally, Ambassador Quillen's translator broke the silence. "Dr. Morrison, what are you exactly?" The elderly scientist looked up from his tablet with the same pleasant smile he had worn throughout their journey to Harmony 7. "I am a retired physics professor who enjoys gardening and old movies," he said simply. "I am also one of 7 manifestations of humanity's collective determination to protect innocent life throughout the galaxy. Both of these things are equally true." Commander Zixith had abandoned his hostile posture entirely. His scales had shifted to deep blue patterns that Sarah recognized as indicating respect and caution among his species. "How many others like you exist?" "Currently, there are 6 others," Dr. Morrison replied. "They appear when they are needed, in whatever form is most appropriate for the circumstances. A combat engineer who ensures that human colonies can defend themselves. A diplomat who can find common ground between species that seem completely incompatible. A healer who can cure diseases that others consider incurable. We are aspects of who humanity chooses to be when faced with the darkness." High Magistrate Vorth's light column dimmed to a respectful level. "For millions of years, we have wondered whether younger species could develop the wisdom necessary for true galactic citizenship. Today, we have seen our answer." Sarah finally found her voice. "Dr. Morrison, why didn't you tell me what you really were?" He smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Because it wasn't necessary, Captain Chen. You represent the best of humanity perfectly well on your own. I am only here as insurance, in case someone mistakes our preference for diplomacy as a sign of weakness." Commander Zixith stood and moved to the center of the chamber, his massive form somehow managing to convey humility despite his imposing size. "I formally withdraw all accusations against humanity," he announced. "Any species capable of creating beings like Dr. Morrison clearly possesses wisdom and restraint far beyond what we had imagined." Other delegates began voicing their agreement. The vote that had seemed certain to go against humanity was now swinging in the opposite direction, but Sarah realized that something more important had changed. The other species were no longer looking at humans as dangerous children who needed to be controlled. They were looking at humanity as potential partners in protecting and nurturing galactic civilization. Dr. Morrison closed his tablet and stood up once more. "If you'll excuse me," he said politely, "I should probably go check on the former pirates. Converting an entire fleet of warships into hospital vessels requires some follow-up maintenance." He walked toward the exit again, but this time he paused at the doorway. "Captain Chen, I believe the negotiations will proceed much more smoothly from this point forward. The galaxy has a much better understanding of who we are and what we stand for." As he disappeared into the corridor, Sarah turned back to face the assembled delegates. But now, instead of fear and suspicion, she saw curiosity and hope in their alien faces. The crisis had passed, but something better had taken its place. The galaxy had gained not just another member species, but a group of guardians who would stand watch over the innocent and vulnerable, and perhaps, for the first time in millions of years, the darkness between the stars seemed a little less threatening to all who called the cosmos home.